Antietam, okay, with which I'm sure most of you are quite familiar. Now, the image you see there, that is the monument to George Greene that stands at the top of Culp's Hill in the Gettysburg National Military Park. And people who know of George Greene probably remember him best for his defense of Culp's Hill on the night of July 2nd, the second night of the Battle of Gettysburg. And that's what he's best known for, if he's known at all. In the 19th century and the early 20th century, historians put a lot of emphasis on the fighting at Culp's Hill. Later in the 20th century and into the 21st century, much more emphasis has been placed on the fighting at the southern end of the line, Longstreet's attack on Little Round Top and the southern part of Cemetery Ridge. So, and Culp's Hill has kind of not received nearly as much attention. Greene came from a very distinguished Rhode Island family. He was a second cousin, actually, of Nathaniel Greene, who you may remember. Nathaniel Greene is generally regarded as the second greatest general on the American side during the Revolutionary War. Nathaniel Greene was the general who was put in charge of the Continental Army forces in the southern states. And he was the general that Washington had said that should anything happen to him, Greene was the one who should replace him. So he came from that, those Greenes, okay? And that meant a lot back in those days. Okay? Unfortunately, as Greene was growing up, his family, his particular family, was in shipping, and in 1807, there were some changes in the shipping laws that led to his father losing the family fortune. And instead of going to Brown University, which was his original intention, Greene instead, at an early age, ended up going to New York City and began his career as a clerk in a dry goods store on Pearl Street in New York City, Manhattan, if you know where that is. And but as fate would have it, the superintendent of West Point happened to come into that dry goods store. And he struck up a conversation with the young George Greene, and ended up getting the Secretary of War to arrange for an appointment to West Point for Greene. And Greene did very well there. He graduated in 1823. He was the second in his class of 35. And he had a lot of famous classmates, Lorenzo Thomas, David Hunter, Dennis Hart Mahan, Joseph Mansfield, who would be his corps commander at Antietam, and of course, Albert Sidney Johnston, who would go south when the war began. Now, the top students at West Point traditionally chose engineering as their specialty, but Greene didn't. Greene chose the artillery. But instead of being assigned out, as most young graduates were, he was retained at West Point as an assistant professor of mathematics and a principal assistant professor of engineering. One of his more notable students was a guy named Robert E. Lee, okay, with whom he would have additional dealings later in life. In 1828, Greene got married. he married a lady named Mary Elizabeth Vinton. And eventually he left West Point, and he was given a duty position in a place called Eastport, Maine. And while the family was there in 1833, by then they had 3 children. And Greene, within 7 months' time, Greene lost his wife and all 3 of their children.
Wow.
This is just a sad, sad reminder of how fragile life was in the 19th century. I mean, here's a guy who's a military officer, comes from a well-to-do family, well-educated, lovely families, all but wiped out in 7 months' time by disease. That may be one of the reasons that Greene went on to study medicine and law. And he actually completed studies in both of those disciplines. He did not go ahead and get a medical degree or a law degree, didn't certify, but he knew both of those fields well. And he just immersed himself in work. Finally, in 1836, he resigned his commission to become a civil engineer. The tablet you see there is a tablet that was erected much later to Greene by the state of Rhode Island. He was involved in some very important projects. If you see the image of the bridge on the right-hand side of the screen, that is the High Bridge. Okay? That's what it's called. And it has been transformed today into a pedestrian walkway. It's no longer suitable for carrying vehicle traffic. But Greene, one of the projects Greene worked on was enlarging that bridge at that time as part of the Croton Aqueduct project, which this was a huge project in the 1830s that brought water to Manhattan. And Greene also designed the Croton Aqueduct Reservoir, which was located in New York's Central Park. And the whole Croton Aqueduct trail, the trail that the aqueduct followed, is now a parkland that you can hike, and some of the structures have been preserved both in Central Park and other areas of New York that you can go and visit. They've been preserved as historical sites. So Greene also was one of the 12 individuals who founded the American Society of Civil Engineers and Architects. So he was very accomplished. He remarried. He married a lady named Martha Barrett Dana, and you may have heard of the Massachusetts politician named Dana. Actually, there were several. But Dana was a Massachusetts legislator. He was the president of the Senate in Massachusetts. He served in Congress. And he and his wife, Martha, had 4 sons, 1 daughter, and another son who died in infancy. And 3 of the 4 boys pursued military careers. His oldest son was Samuel Dana Greene, and he was the XO on the USS Monitor at the Battle of Hampton Roads. Okay? Another son, Francis V. Greene, ended up commanding a brigade at the Battle of Manila in the Spanish-American War. Charles Greene served on his father's staff at Culp's Hill. and went on to lose a leg later in the Civil War. His fourth son wanted to enlist in the military, and Greene would not allow it because he wanted to be certain that one of his sons would survive to carry on the family name. And so he asked his son, he actually forbid his son to join the military. Now, prior to the Battle of Antietam, Greene, first of all, when the war broke out, Greene rejoined the Army after 25 years, and he became the colonel of the 6th New York Volunteer Infantry. Okay. In April of 1862, he was promoted to brigadier general. And at the Battle of Cedar Mountain, prior to Second Bull Run, he commanded a brigade under General Geary at Cedar Mountain. His brigade held off multiple very strong Confederate attacks until they were finally forced to withdraw due to other Union units withdrawing on their flanks. When Geary was wounded, Greene took temporary command of the division. And when Geary didn't come back, he later was promoted to take full command of the division. And at Cedar Mountain, they had been a part of the Army of Virginia. Okay? But as you will recall, that army was later blended into the Army of the Potomac, and the Corps, of which Greene had been a part, became the 12th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, and his division became the 2nd Division. This is the order of battle of the 2nd Division. As you can see, there were 3 brigades. The 1st Brigade, led by Lieutenant Hector Tyndale, and the W there next to him means that he was wounded. And Major Orrin J. Crane took over that brigade. The 2nd Brigade was led by Henry J. Steinrich, and the 3rd Brigade by William Goodrich. It looks like they had a lot of artillery attached to the division, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 batteries, although most of these were not available to the division command during the Battle of Antietam. They were a lot of the guns were actually controlled by the Corps. Knapp's battery was used, and McGilvery's battery was used, but then some other batteries came up to assist the division during the battle. Goodrich, I'll mention briefly, because as we'll see, Goodrich's brigade was detached from Greene's division just as they began their advance. But William Goodrich is an interesting study on his own. He grew up in New York, studied in the seminary, was going to become a minister, and then decided to become a teacher. Then he ended up a lawyer, ardent abolitionist. He was the one who originally raised the 60th New York. He was promoted to command his brigade the day before Antietam. He had a real premonition of death, which was accurate. He was killed about 9 a.m. in the morning at the Battle of Antietam at the age of 40. He wrote a lovely poem in a letter to his wife there. If you're interested in it, let me know when I'm done, and I'll be happy to send copies to Scott, and he can disseminate them to anybody that wants them. Okay. Now, the other 2 brigade commanders, Hector Tyndale. Hector Tyndale was a lieutenant colonel. He fought at Second Bull Run. The casualties at Second Bull Run in his brigade were very bad. And when it was all over, he found himself as the senior officer in his brigade. And that's why he wound up being in command of the brigade at Antietam, although he hadn't yet been raised to brigadier general. He was wounded twice during his service with Greene's division at Antietam. He was shot in the hip very early in the engagement. He continued in command. Oh, there's a typo. He continued in command until he was shot in the head, okay, but not killed. At that point, the next officer took over the brigade. He recuperated, and after the Battle of Gettysburg, he rejoined the Army, and partly because of his great gallantry at Antietam, he was promoted and jumped 2 ranks from lieutenant colonel, skipped over colonel, and became a brigadier general. Unfortunately, in 1864, he had to leave the Army because he suffered continued ill health, no doubt in part because of the wounds he sustained at Antietam. I can't imagine that being shot in the head would not cause you some pretty significant problems later on. The other brigadier of the 2nd Brigade was Henry Steinrich. There's not a lot of information available about Henry Steinrich. He had originally helped organize a Pennsylvania regiment, the 109th, and served as their colonel. He was also at the Battle of Cedar Mountain and was wounded badly by a shell fragment in the abdomen while there. However, he recuperated, and when Brigadier General Henry Prince, who had commanded the brigade up to that point, was captured, and when he was healed from his wound, he became the brigade commander of the 2nd Brigade. He served with great distinction at Antietam. He would be killed at Chancellorsville. I was unable to find any photographs of him. So now, if you're not familiar with the Battle of Antietam, or if you just need a quick refresher, this map does a pretty good job. It says 7:30 up there. That's probably about right, at least when things started. But the key features of the battlefield, I'll just really quickly try to point out here. We've got up here, this is the North Woods. Okay. Here's the East Woods. Here's the very famous cornfield. Here's the West Woods, which is a very large woodlot. And then here is the Dunker Church, okay, famous landmark. And then way over here is the Bloody Lane, which is a sunken road. The visitor center is right about here, okay, if you go to visit Antietam today. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, just as was the case at Gettysburg, it was also the case at Antietam. Nobody's watch was set to the same time. Okay, so yeah, you'll read one account and they'll say, "Oh, this happened. This happened at 9 o'clock in the morning," and the other guy who was there said, "No, it was 11:30 in the morning when that happened." Just trying to figure out the exact chronology down to the half hour or the 15-minute interval is almost impossible from the confusion in the sources that are available. But we still have a good idea of the general flow of things, okay? So don't take the 7:30 very seriously. The Hooker's Corps, you will remember, opened the attack. They did open right around 6:30 in the morning, and they attacked down this road, the Hagerstown Turnpike. Okay, and their ultimate objective was the high ground here by the Dunker Church. Okay, because this was the center of the Confederate position, and if they could take this high ground and this woods, they would then be in a position. The Union would then be in a position to march straight down the Hagerstown Turnpike, uh, see Sharpsburg, and get in completely behind the rest of Lee's line here. So that was part of the plan that morning. So Hooker began the attack. Mansfield's 12th Corps consisted of two divisions. There was Greene's division and there was Williams' division. Okay? And they roused at about 6:30. And men got up about then. And by 7:30, they were also on the road, this road here, heading south to support Hooker's attack, which was there was this ferocious fight going on at that point in the cornfield and at the very northern end of the West Woods. By the time Mansfield's Corps actually got into the fighting, Hooker's Corps was almost fought out at that point. Okay, they were largely exhausted. They still had some units engaged, but for the most part, they had withdrawn, as had many of the Confederates that they were fighting. It had been a slugfest between Hooker and Jackson's troops. Now, I'm leaving the same map up. As the 12th Corps advanced, Greene has Steinrich, Tyndale, and Goodrich. Okay, Goodrich is detached and sent way over here to support some of Hooker's troops who were still fighting in the north edge of the West Woods. Okay. That left Williams' division with Gordon and Crawford's brigades, which were very large brigades, but also had a lot of Greene units in them. And then Tyndale and Steinrich as part of Greene's division. Okay. The Greene's division at this point was reduced to about 1,700 men. Okay. Williams' division led the Corps toward the field, with Greene's division following behind. They were formed, the men were actually formed in old-fashioned Napoleonic battalion columns. Okay? And the reason for that was that Mansfield, the Corps commander, knew that five of the regiments, four of them in Williams' division and one of them in Greene's division, were if you should forgive the pun, but these were Greene divisions. They had never been in combat before. This was going to be their baptism by fire. And Mansfield wanted to leave them in columns until the last possible moment. Almost all the officers under Mansfield were really unhappy with this, because of course, the Confederate artillery, the Confederates had artillery in position on this high ground here, okay, and some on this high ground here. And the shelling from that artillery was just horrible. And to be in column rather than line formation just made the troops that much more of a great target. Okay, for the Confederate guns. Okay. Now, whoops, sorry, getting ahead of myself here. Okay. As the division advanced, they came to the point where they encountered enemy troops they encountered enemy troops at the north end of the East Woods. That's right here. Okay? And so the Mansfield finally gave Williams the order to deploy, and he was assisting one of those Greene regiments in deploying. He was encouraging them because it was the first time they had ever done this under fire. And that's when Mansfield was mortally wounded. Greene immediately ordered, knowing that Mansfield was gone and knowing that Williams was, as the senior division officer, would now be in charge of the division, Greene immediately deployed his 2 regiments on the left of the Union line. Okay? Mansfield was another older general. Greene was old. There were actually 17 other generals in the Union Army older than Greene, but his men thought he was old. He was 60 at this point in time. He was 61 at Culp's Hill. General Mansfield was shot. One witness said he was wounded in the right breast, the ball penetrating about 2 inches from the nipple and passing out the back near the edge of the shoulder blade. And he came tottering on his horse down the road, and some of the men noticed something was wrong with him, and they called for others to help him get off the horse. And they carried him to a tree where they left him to await a surgeon, but he would die from that wound. So at that point, Williams took over the division, or the corps. Greene's division now. Here is the East Woods that we saw. Okay. Here is Greene's. Here's Greene's division. Okay, here's Steinrich, kind of refused on the left, and here's Tyndale in the front. There was some confusion in getting them deployed, mainly because of the change in corps command, and also because Tyndale's men, there, you'll notice there are 3 Ohio regiments and then the 28th Pennsylvania. And the 28th Pennsylvania is Greene, okay, untried. And so there was some discussion about whether they should put the Ohio flag in the middle of the line, but so the Pennsylvania boys could see it easier. But then the other Ohio regiment said, no, we have to each have our own flag and so on. And so there was some discussion about that. It took them a while to get into position. Very typical Civil War silliness in getting the men deployed. Now, as they advanced through these cornfields and into the East Woods, this section right here, this area right here, this is the famous Antietam cornfield, okay? Hood's division had advanced through there, just been repelled. But now more Confederate troops were coming up from D.H. Hill's division, okay? And in particular, Colquitt's Confederate brigade was in the cornfield. Well, what did I do? Good heavens, I'm so sorry. There we go. Okay. My mouse does funny things sometimes. I don't know why. Here's Colquitt in the cornfield here. And as you can see, Tyndale is coming in to his front and on his flank. Some of the men described things as they moved towards Colquitt's line. Lieutenant Colonel Eugene Powell, commanding the 66th Ohio, remembered mist and fog of the early morning rendered everything obscure and uncertain. But peering through that cloud of vapor, I saw a line of enemies standing in the open space just beyond and behind a rail fence. And sure enough, there they are. Okay, they have run into the 6th Georgia, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Newton. Now, Powell, Colonel Powell, the 66th, ordered his men to open fire. Major Crane of the 7th Ohio ran over and said, no, don't fire. Those aren't enemy troops. But it quickly became apparent that they were, in fact, enemy troops. And so the Ohio boys opened up. And Newton, the lieutenant colonel commanding the 6th Georgia, was killed in the initial volley. And then the 28th Pennsylvania, green though they were a big regiment, they plowed into the right and rear of the 6th Georgia. And there was desperate hand-to-hand fighting. Colquitt, the brigade commander, later reported, "We were exposed to a fire from all sides and nearly surrounded. The enemy closed upon our right so near that the ranks were scarcely distinguishable." The 6th Georgia got hammered, and then the other regiments of the Confederate line just went down like dominoes and started fleeing back south from the cornfield. Steinrich's men, meanwhile, over here on the left of the Union line, here's Steinrich with his 3 regiments. Steinrich, the 10th Maryland, is running from the attack by Garland's brigade. Steinrich, meanwhile, comes crashing through the East Woods, okay, and puts Garland's brigade to flight. Garland's brigade just broke and ran. And they ran all the way back to the junction of the Smoketown Road and the Hagerstown Pike, which is very near that's where the Dunker Church is, okay? And there were 3 major Confederate generals there. There was D.H. Hill and John Bell Hood and Stonewall Jackson himself at the Dunker Church trying to rally these Confederate troops and largely failing to do so. Okay. Greene's men pushed on. They came through the cornfield. They came through the East Woods, and they suffered quite a bit from S.D. Lee's artillery. But one of the guys in the 28th Pennsylvania recalled that Lee's battery had complete range on us, creating sad havoc with our brave fellows. They fell left and right, some with heads blown off, others with legs, arms, and so on. But eventually, the Union troops Greene's troops came through the East Woods. Okay. Whoops, sorry. They came out. Someday I'll learn to do this. Okay. They came through the East Woods. They penetrated to here. And here's the Mama Farm, if you need a landmark on the Antietam battlefield. Okay. They started chasing the Confederates. And then they came to a swale here. Okay. And there they paused for a moment because they needed to replenish their ammunition. Now, at this point, Greene knew that Sedgwick's division, okay, here's Sedgwick's division. Sedgwick's division from the 2nd Corps had marched across to the right of Williams and Greene and was attacking into the West Woods at about the same time. they ran into a horrible, horrible counterattack from McLaw's division and Walker's divisions, including they got hit by Ransom, they got hit by Anderson, they got hit by some of Manning's brigade coming up, and they were taken in flank, as you can see by these attack lines here. And this whole Union division in about 20 minutes time was put to rout, okay? General Greene down in this swale didn't see that happening. He thought that this other Union, the Sedgwick's division, was still on his right, and he thought that Williams' division was still on his right as well. So once they had replenished their ammunition, Greene's division continued their charge and came right up to and then past the Dunker Church right in here, okay? And they ended up in the woods, in the West Woods, beyond the Dunker Church. Okay? And at this point, this is when a decisive Union victory at Antietam was denied. Okay. General Greene sent repeated requests to Altheus Williams, commanding the Corps, for reinforcements, because he knew that at this instant he had broken Stonewall Jackson's line, but he only had 1,700 men when he started. He needed a lot more men, hopefully another division to come in right behind him or beside him or something, to exploit the gap that he had created. Okay, because the Confederates were already starting to respond. They had other brigades coming up. But right now was the time when the Union, had there been another division handy, or even had McClellan decided to later on to reinforce this position, in the next hour or two, they could have broken the line right then and there. But I have to tell you, sadly, that did not happen. Okay. I gotta, excuse me just a second. There we go. Okay. He saw the potential, and Altheus Williams, in his official report, says, "I greatly regretted that his repeated calls for aid could be answered only by sending the 13th New Jersey and subsequently the 27th Indiana and the Purnell Legion of the 3rd Brigade." So he sent 3 regiments over to help, but those regiments had already been engaged. They weren't fresh and they were small. Impressed with the importance of holding this position, I made several efforts to recall the residue of the 3rd Brigade of his division to his assistance, as well as to procure reinforcement from other sources, but did not succeed. Williams is being very politic, as generals often were in their official after-action reports, because he does not name these other sources to whom he turned for succor, but did not succeed. And they have never been revealed. I have searched the OR quite a lot, and I've done some other research, but I have not been able to find exactly where else Williams sent trying to get aid. I can't state definitively at this point in my research that word actually reached McClellan. Okay. I think maybe it did, but I can't prove it, because Williams never revealed to whom he sent for aid. He may have sent for aid to Sumner, commander of the Second Corps, who were just getting into position to attack the Bloody Lane at that point, which would have been unnecessary if the breakthrough of if the breakthrough of Greene's division could have been capitalized upon. Later, in April of 1863, Greene himself wrote, "I still think there were some persons who were aware of our presence on that day, if the commanding general was not, and that we unmistakably left our work on that field." And how true that was. Without reinforcement, Greene managed to hold this advanced position right here, that I'm circling with the red dot there. He managed to hold that advanced position for 2 hours, okay, during which he was attacked by elements of Kershaw's brigade, elements of Manning's brigade, and elements of Barksdale's brigade. Finally, the 3rd South Carolina here managed to get some troops. They managed to start turning the right flank here, and Kershaw was threatening at least to turn the left flank, and after fighting valiantly for 2 hours, Greene, and discovering that there were no Union troops at that moment on his right flank, Greene decided that he had no choice but to retire. And so they did retire. They went back to this swale, this dip in the ground here where they could be sheltered, and they maintained their position there for the rest of the day. The casualties in Greene's division, not counting Goodrich's division, he had a total of 1,727 men in Tyndale and Steinrich's brigades. He suffered 114 killed, 507 wounded, and 30 missing, presumably taken prisoner. That's a total of 651 casualties. So the casualty rate is approximately 38%, if you round up the thousands. So 38%. And unfortunately, as it turned out, I can't say it was for naught, because they imposed horrible casualties on the Confederates that they encountered, much worse than 38%. But in the end, positionally, it did not advance the Union cause. So now, are there questions or comments or?
I'll let everybody know, most people are probably muted. So if you have a question, unmute and ask Mark a question. I'm going to start out and just make a comment that you had mentioned the 27th Indiana, which I on behalf of Steve, I'm going to make sure I always give the reminder. 27th Indiana was raised here in Monroe County and the surrounding areas. So
that's right.
That is sort of one of our home regiments that was in fact involved in this.
That's right. And they were one of the regiments that did come to Greene's aid,
yes,
on his right flank, until they were forced to retire early, though, because they ran out of ammo and they had to go back and replenish. Anybody else have a question or comment or thought they'd like to share?
Can you remind me, Mark, who you had said was involved with the Monitor? Whose son was that?
That Greene,
Greene,
George
okay.
Greene's son. Yeah, George Greene's son was the XO on the executive officer on the Monitor.
And
Yeah.
that adds for a plug for our April program, which will be by historian and author John White. Will be talking about the USS Monitor. So,
Oh, good.
Mark unknowingly gave us a nice segue into our April program as well.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. It just goes to show you too how, boy, in the 19th century military, I mean, ties were close. Everybody knew everybody. You know, it was like being in a small town. You know, everybody knew everybody or was related to everybody in the general officer corps or the higher ranks. Yeah.
Sure.
Have you ever read anything, Mark, that Greene wrote about Lee, since he knew Lee, but Greene was very much an abolitionist, and Lee's family were slaveholders, and
Yeah, well, Greene was largely apolitical. I have not read anything that he wrote about Lee, unfortunately. But even more so than being generally opposed to slavery, for Greene, the cause was always Union, more so than abolition. Okay. For George. And also George Greene went on, I should tell you that he went on, of course, obviously he conducted the brilliant defense of Culp's Hill at the Battle of Gettysburg. Later, he was wounded. He was shot in the face, and he lost part of his jaw and some teeth, and he was disfigured on one side of his face. That's why all the later portraits of him in life are always taken from the same side. He's always showing this side of his face instead of that side because it was shot to pieces. But yeah, he went on. He served, he served with distinction throughout the war and survived it, and went on to do more great things in engineering.
Mark, that plaque put up by the state of Rhode Island,
Yes.
listing all the things that Greene did. The 1840s seem to be omitted. Was he in the Mexican War at all? Did this happen to bypass?
No, he was not in the Mexican War. No,
Okay.
no. When he left the army in 1836, and then he didn't come back to it until Lincoln issued the call for volunteers. And at that point, Greene offered himself back for military service again.
Because the Mexican War was to the Civil War what World War I was to World War II.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the generals and things.
Yeah, a lot of the generals learned their trade in the Mexican War.
Right.
Absolutely. Oh, I should mention, too, you might wonder, why did Greene command a division at Antietam and then was commanding only a brigade at Gettysburg? just 6, 7, 8, 9 months, 9 or 10 months later. And that was because after the Battle of Antietam, Greene took leave for about 3 weeks. It's never been disclosed exactly why. Several of his fellow officers thought that he was so appalled by the carnage at Antietam that he just needed to get away for a little while and screw his head back on, because it was just, I mean, it was appalling. But when he came back, while he was gone, Geary, who had been wounded, returned to service. And because Geary was 4 days seniority on Greene, they gave Geary the division back. And then when Greene returned from leave, he found he was commanding a brigade again. And so he had a brigade of Geary's division then at Gettysburg. He wasn't terribly happy about that. He and Geary had many, many differences of opinion, including the fact that at Culp's Hill, Geary neither Geary nor Slocum wanted Greene to entrench his men on Culp's Hill. But he did it anyway. And as it turned out, that was probably a really, really, really good idea.
Mark,
Yeah.
you were talking about George Greene's son that was on the Monitor. Do
Yeah.
you know his fate? In other words, it was not long after the Battle of Hampton Roads, of course, at the end of the year, that the Monitor went down off Cape Hatteras. Do you know?
Right. I don't know if he was killed at that time or not.
I mean, I
I'm
certainly
sorry.
can look it up. I just thought you might know.
Yeah, I could too. I should have, but I
There were
didn't.
only, I think, 13 men that died when the ship went down because it was actually being towed. So it's regular
Right.
officer
Yeah.
corps. Its regular officer corps may not have been there.
May not have been on it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, but that's a great question.
Yeah. Well, it'll come in handy in a couple of months.
Okay. Yes. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Mark, was it General Richardson that wrote the poem to his wife?
Oh, the Goodrich. It was the
Goodrich,
one I
okay,
talked
all
about
right.
tonight. Yeah, General
Yeah.
Goodrich. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to get a copy of that either from you or from Scott or someone. I'd like to see
Okay.
it.
I'll get it to Scott and maybe he can get it out to the email to everybody that wants one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome.
Jen, I had that in my notes too to ask for that. So
Great,
Okay. Okay. Good. I'll send it to you. Yeah.
great, thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Anybody
Well,
else?
thank you. Oh yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just like to put in a plug for the BHC. I've been a member of that for about 10 years now, and really enjoy it. Mark does all kinds of great things. He goes from Macbeth to Ray Bradbury to Trump to Victoria. It's I mean, he's just fun to watch.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. That's
And
very
I might
kind
add
of
that
you.
it's really fun when Scott and Mark collaborate, and those are especially.
well, it's fun for us too.
It's fun for yeah. We have a great time. We really do.
And
Yeah.
as I mentioned before, just before this meeting started, he and I were just chit-chatting a little bit about some programs we might try and add to the Bloomington
Mhm.
Humanities schedule for the fall. So
Well,
Right.
for
it's a
anybody
matter
who
of
hasn't,
timing and everything else too. So
great. Well, for anybody who hasn't tried it, I highly encourage you to check out the website and pick a class. And you know, Mark is gracious enough to offer it at no charge right now, donations only, which is just absolutely incredible. So just try it. I think you'll really love it. And you know, you don't have to go anywhere in the snow. You just tune in. So
Right. Yeah. Oh, Jamie just looked up. Samuel Dana Greene did live. He did survive the Monitor.
Okay. Thank you.
Didn't die. Till when? 1884?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Lived till 1884. Thanks, honey.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. She's off screen. That's my, you know, that's the lady who keeps me, she keeps me in line. Okay.
she's the research manager apparently tonight.
Yeah, she tries to keep me from rocking while I'm presenting, but that's really hard. I hope I didn't make y'all seasick. I will put in one quick plug. Our next Bloomington Humanities Center course will begin February 23rd. And it's a little different for us because it's not strictly just humanities, but we're going to look, it's called the Trump phenomenon. And we're going to try to answer the question, why do the people who believe in Donald Trump believe in Donald Trump?
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. I know. But we're gonna go for understanding, and if nothing else, I will try to diminish my anger and ill feelings by teaching this class. So,
All right.
thank
Any
you all.
final questions for anybody before we wrap up for tonight? All right. Sounds good. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll hope to see you next month. And I think the date is March 9th, I believe, again, to remind people, with Michelle Crowell will be our presenter. And I'm excited. to have her speak about the topic of Charles Wellington Reed and some of the illustrations that joined his letters. And I will add that there's her talk is based on the collection in the Library of Congress. And once we set the meeting up, or set the, I don't know how I want to say it, if they do the meeting promo or whatever, Michelle sent me a link. All the papers, much of the stuff that she's going to talk about is actually on the Library of Congress's website. So people can go on and kind of search through them and look for the papers and the letters themselves. It's just kind of a neat correlation to the talk, I think, that we'll be able to do.
Oh, yeah. If you've never been on that website, that's a great website.
Yeah, there's lots of
the Library of Congress.
stuff on there.
It's just awesome. You get images of the exact documents, and it's great. Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. We'll wrap up there. I will also tell you that I experimented tonight with recording our meeting. So in case people miss, we may have an opportunity to view a meeting later as well. We'll see if I screwed it up royally or just screwed it up a little bit. I'm sure I screwed it up in some way, but we'll see, and hopefully it'll work out for us. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Everybody be safe.
All right.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.